Welcome, investigator. Evil is on the rise. Crime is escalating. Our mission is to eliminate the crime by exposing evil, examine why it manifests, and highlight the brave souls that confront it every day. Join us as we work together to bring justice to every victim. Welcome to All Things Crime. Here's your host, Jared Bradley.
Hey everybody, it's Jared. Welcome to another episode of All Things Crime. Appreciate you being here. Appreciate all of you that have subscribed. We're almost at 5,000 subscribers on YouTube. It blows me away with all the support that we're getting. And I thank all of you for being, following the show and commenting, especially all the comments about different cases and things that we talk about. Love talking to you guys and responding back and forth. So if you have comments ever, then, please put them down and I'll get back to those as quick as I can. But we also, I definitely recommend hitting that little bell so you don't miss an episode, and please share it. And if you can write comments and things like that, just boost the how everybody sees it. And so that's just awesome. I just can't tell you how much I appreciate everybody. So if you are listening to this on Spotify or iTunes or whatever you're listening to it on, it's not iTunes. What is it? The Apple Podcasts, I think, or whatever platform you're on. I'd recommend you jumping over to either YouTube or Rumble and seeing it there as well, just because there's going to be a clip at the end of this with a detective that is specifically talking about the M-VAC and how the M-VAC was actually able to break the case that we're going to be talking about. So I am in Fort Worth. I'm in a hotel room making this. And I'm down here actually not only visiting some of the departments around here like Fort Worth PD, but also is at a cold case conference. And with my good friend Joe Kennedy. If you guys don't know him, he's been on the show a couple of times, and he is a cold case expert. And so, he's even written a couple of books, and just absolutely amazing as far as helping agencies set up cold case squads and, helping them organize cases, all that kind of stuff. It's just absolutely amazing what some of these guys can do. So why am I addressing this particular case and talking about this in light of this week and being at a cold case? Because it's interesting when cases start stalling or going cold. They don't go cold because of lack of effort from the police department. They normally go cold just because leads don't pan out, witnesses haven't come forward yet or won't talk. Maybe that changes down the line. Spouses or girlfriends, boyfriends, those kind of relationships change basically. And so as they do, then those circumstances will change. And sometimes people will come forward where they wouldn't before. So that's one way that I know a lot of cases are solved. And another way is technology comes along that didn't exist before. So that can be DNA, like for example, the forensics genealogy, the DNA. It's not the CODIS and the database that most people are accustomed to. It looks more on the genealogical side, so family tree kind of stuff. And there's a lot of cases, really exciting stuff. But there's a lot of cases that are being solved with that. That's how the Golden State Killer was solved. So. Pretty exciting stuff, and technology as a whole, and the M-VAC is playing a major part of that, and that's why it's so exciting for us. But the case that I want to talk about today is the victim's name was Uta von Schwedler, and if you haven't heard of her, she was a German immigrant. This is around 2014 when all of this happened. Uta von Schwedler was, I believe, a genetics researcher at the University of Utah in Salt Lake, and petite little lady. My understanding is barely 5 feet, literally 90 pounds, but she was just a little fireball. Lots of pictures of her like hiking and doing lots of fun stuff. Now she was married in the past to a pediatrician named John Wall. Now, they were divorced. They had 4 kids. And even after the divorce, they were still in this huge custody battle. And John Wall, over time, developed almost an obsession with his ex-wife. She had moved on. She had a new boyfriend. She had a new home. And I think that bothered him even more. But he was fighting for custody of the kids. And I think it was more because he just wanted to hurt her. He really developed almost this obscene hatred for his ex-wife, and clearly unhealthy. But it was almost to the point of just an obsession that he just would do like literally was losing his mind because he hated her so much and wanted to destroy her life and by taking the kids away, that kind of thing. So this is not exactly the pediatrician you want looking after your kids, right? So he was apparently trying to, again, get custody of the children. Uta was an avid scrapbooker. And the word is that she was putting together a scrapbook of her and the kids and their new life. And it didn't include anything of John Wall. And he hated that even more. So what happened was, again, Uta was worked during the day, but her new boyfriend worked at night. So the kids were all staying with their dad, the pediatrician, and so Uta was in her new home, and she was alone. Now, the boyfriend comes home the next morning and finds Uta von Schwedler. So found Uta in the bathtub and deceased. Okay, so there is some blood on the bedding, both the pillow and there's a bloody kind of handprint on the comforter, and then there's a knife and her scrapbook are in the bathtub with her, and she is under the water. Okay, so that's the scenario. That's the kind of you can imagine the crime scene basically. So that's the primary crime scene is the master bedroom and then the bathroom where they found Uta deceased. Okay. The coroner comes and basically when they first looked at it, the case, it was actually ruled a suicide. But there were enough odd things about it that because the cause of death, which it's really important to understand this, the cause of death is drowning. And she had an extremely high level of Xanax in her system. So almost to the point that my understanding is there was so much Xanax in her that if she hadn't drowned, the Xanax would have eventually just completely overwhelmed her system and killed her. So either way, she was in a bad way. Okay. But the actual cause of death is drowning. Well, the detectives just thought that there were way too many things that were wrong with this. First of all, the blood, the knife, the wounds on her arms, especially, almost looked like defensive wounds, as opposed to like suicide type of wounds. The husband, the ex-husband, Dr. Wall, when they interviewed him, first of all, it's critically important to understand that he was adamant that he had never been in that home. Okay. He said, that's her house, and I've never been there. Okay. That's important. And there's lots of newspaper articles that actually said his own words are what convicted him. And that's partially true. His words did kind of seal his fate, but the evidence that was pulled out of the crime scene, the physical evidence, was ultimately what showed him that, yeah, he had been in that house. Okay, so again, back to the investigation as it was kind of going on. They tried swabbing the bedding, and there was very limited DNA. So instead of like a regular STR type of a profile, looking for DNA just in general, they had to focus on the YSTR, which is the Y chromosome, which only men have. And so that kind of obviously eliminated all of Uta's DNA and just focused on the male DNA that might have been on both the pillowcase and eventually on the comforter. So, but initially when they swabbed, they just swabbed the pillowcase because there was on the back side of the pillow, there was some blood, and then they determined that mixed in with that blood was some mucus. And so they determined that most likely that came from her nose. And so it was right in the middle of the pillow, and they thought that's just weird. And so they figured that maybe somebody had pressed this pillow into Uta's face, and that's where that blood came from. So that's kind of setting the scene. And then as it progressed, they also questioned the John Wall, the ex-husband, and he had some scratches on his face, and he said that the dog had done that. But he is also like the next day when he was at work, the people that worked with him said that he was acting really weird. He was acting really weird during the interview, and he had said that he was just home anyway, denied any involvement with. Okay, so it was important to actually place him at the scene because there's no forced entry. They couldn't figure out how if Uta didn't actually kill herself, then how did somebody get into that home without forcing their way in through a door or window? And so they also figured that, well, of all the people that had motive, the ex-husband would definitely be it. And the motto, or it's not really a motto, but kind of a mantra that says it's always the ex-husband or the boyfriend. And that's definitely the first place that people look and that investigators look, because they're the ones that have the most motive to do something drastic, especially harming somebody, let alone killing them. So, all right, what had happened ultimately is John Wall had the kids over at his house. He took the keys from one of the kids of Uta's new home. He used that key to get into there when she was sleeping. Now he had a knife, and this knife, they surmised that he wasn't actually trying to stab her. He was trying to stage this as a suicide. So they found out that he kind of attacked her with the knife in order to control her. And this is important to understand that when people have knife wounds, they're not, especially if they're just kind of superficial, they're just on the top of them. It's typically because they want to control the victim as opposed to actually harm the victim. And they think that that's what John Wall was trying to do, was just control her. And the reason for that is because he had a lethal dose of Xanax in a syringe that, it was interesting, a while, like the previous month, he had written a prescription for his mother of Xanax and then filled it himself. Now, and they suspected that this, that he probably had a syringe full of Xanax, and that the reason that she went into the bathtub is because, as a doctor, John Wall knew that when he inserted that needle somewhere into Uta's skin, if he could then put her in the bathtub, you know how you get kind of wrinkly skin if you're in the bathtub for a long time? I'm pretty sure that's what he was trying to do. Is he'd put her in the bathtub, the water and how the skin absorbs water would kind of hide the needle mark. Okay, so again, he attacks her on the bed, grabs her pillow And so Uta, even though she's only 90 pounds, being a little fireball, she obviously fought back. And that's where she got the wounds. And so the knife actually cut her up a bit. And that gave her, that means some of her blood was on the bedding. And ultimately, John Wall had got something that blood on him and put his hand down onto the bedspread. Okay. Also, when he had obviously hit her in the face, that's what made her nose bleed and had some of the mucus out there, and that was on the underside of the pillow. But then when he pushed down on that pillow to basically smother her, knocked her out, injected her full of this Xanax, and then stripped her down, took her into the bathtub, filled the bathtub with water, and put her in there. And because of the Xanax, I mean, I'm sure it didn't take very long to kick in with her being so petite. Eventually, she slipped under the water and drowned. And that's essentially what happened with, and that's the physical evidence that's the scenario and what actually happened. But you can imagine if you're just a crime scene investigator, a detective, you come up onto this scenario, you're like, what actually happened here? Did she actually try to slice herself and then realize that it was just too painful, and then decided to just inject herself with Xanax and peacefully slide under the water and kill herself that way? Apparently, that it was staged well enough that that's what the coroner eventually or initially decided that that's what had happened. But because of, again, all the weird circumstances of, why would she start cutting herself with a knife? And especially because she was happy at work. She was happy with her life. She was happy with her new boyfriend, her new home. All of her coworkers said that she was not acting any kind of weird at all. So it's just nothing really added up. And that's why the detectives kept pursuing it, despite the suicide verdict, basically, that the coroner had given. So, but the problem is there wasn't enough physical evidence to actually say that's not what happened until about a year and a half into the investigation. Detective Gordon Parks and others learned about the MVAC, and they decided to use the MVAC on that pillow. So where John Wall had pushed the pillow down onto Uta's face on the side where his hands were, that's where they MVAC'd. That's where they collected his DNA, and they got a full profile from that pillow. Then they also brought in some other experts to look at the blood patterns and things like that, and he recommended MVACing the bedspread, and they got John Wall's full profile off of there too. So it's important to remember John Wall, during his first night that they questioned him, he was adamant that he had never been in that home. So that's super important, right? Well, now they found his DNA there. So during the defense, my understanding is the defense actually said, well, that's not Dr. Wall's DNA. That's a combination of all his children that have combined into there, and it just happened to have all the exact alleles that that Dr. Wall had, and it's a combination of all the children, not actually Dr. Wall. Which, for those of us that know anything about DNA and STR, that's not that's not a reality. So they really didn't have much of a defense. So when you have a really good DNA profile and there's no justification for why that DNA is there, that can be really, really damning. That's super strong evidence. So again, such an interesting case, and Detective Parks was basically just so grateful for it and for that new technology and DNA that placed Dr. Wall at the crime scene when he was adamant that he had never been there. And if the MVAC wasn't able to collect so much more DNA than what the swabbing can, then he might have actually got away with this, because, like I said, the initial cause of death was, they ruled as a suicide. So that's it's pretty incredible. And it's good to get some of these guys, especially the smarter criminals, get them off the streets, because they're just dangerous people. But the process that Dr. Wall had to have gone through in order to come up with this entire scenario, figure out the Xanax, figure out the wrote the prescription for his mom, deciding to put her in the bathtub in order to hide the needle marks and all that kind of stuff. That's pretty well thought out, and those kind of criminals are really hard to catch. But it's almost impossible to not have DNA placed somewhere. So the fact that not only the crime labs being as sensitive as they are, but also now, if they don't have a visible stain like a blood spatter or saliva, something like that, then touch DNA is a really major factor nowadays, because the MVAC can collect so much more, and that's critically important for a lot of cases. And in this particular case, it was the game changer. So thought you guys would be interested in this super interesting case. I'm going to put a clip on the end of this of Corden Parks, the lead detective in Salt Lake, talking about the MVAC and kind of how it changed the whole course of the investigation. But don't ever give up on these guys, and don't ever, especially as family members. I know you'll never forget your loved one, but it's also important to never lose faith that the detectives if there's new technology, if there's new witnesses, if there's anything that changes, they will be all over it. And I was just down at Fort Worth PD visiting with the cold case detectives down there. And just the way these guys talked, there's all sorts of conversations that we were having about all these different cases. And they could rattle off cases from 50 years ago that, they could talk about the victim. They talked about the victim's family. They talk about the circumstances of the crime scene, where the bodies were found, all the way to how they were killed, and suspects. They had everything. And these guys, they know their cases inside and out, and they are super dedicated to solving that case. If there's ever a chance that they can solve it, they will. So have faith in them. And thanks again for listening, guys. Enjoy this clip.
My name is Corden Parks. I'm a homicide detective for Salt Lake City Police Department, and we're here today to talk about the Uta von Schwedler case. On September the 27th, 2011, Uta von Schwedler was found deceased inside of her own house. She was in her bathtub in cold water. She was discovered by her boyfriend. And what we're here to talk about particularly is the DNA work that was done on that case. Initially, what was found was a partial YSTR profile on her fingernails. There was only 5 out of 16 markers that were processed and had enough levels of DNA to yield a value for 5 markers. All 5 of those markers matched her ex-husband, John Wall. Unfortunately, there were 2 male children that lived in the house with her also, and so that partial YSTR profile also matched her 2 male children. The case went on for over a year before the M-VAC machine was used. The M-VAC machine was used initially on a bloody pillow. There was a pillow with a small blood stain on it. The M-VAC was used on that. It was huge. It was a huge development. The M-VACing and the finding of Dr. John Wall's alleles on the pillow was one of the 2 deciding factors in filing the case, filing a murder charge against Dr. John Wall. After the charges were filed, we did additional M-VACing on the comforter. We had a blood spatter expert that we retained and paid. He came in and he recommended that we try M-VACing and an area where there was a bloody glove print. And that area also yielded all of Dr. John Wall's alleles. And that was a big factor in his conviction. Without the M-VACing, we had limited DNA, we had limited results, and the M-VACing was very, very useful. The M-VAC is a really great machine because it yields up to, 20 times more DNA for testing than you'd get by just the traditional swabbing method. So it's huge, and it's hugely helpful in all of our cases. What we find it's really useful for is fabrics, particularly cotton fabrics. It just washes out cells out of fabrics and gives us this 20 times boost in sample for testing, and it's tremendously useful on clothing. Anything to do with cloth fabrics, particularly clothing, victims' clothing, yeah, it'll be huge.
Thanks for joining us. Your attention today brings us one step closer to exposing and eliminating the evil that brings crime to our communities. Hit subscribe and share this episode. Together, we will bring justice to every victim.